we decided that since people had received flyers and we had advertisement in the papers to try and get as many people out in Mora County as possible, that we'd go ahead with this event. So we really are grateful that as many people have shown up. Our group, Drilling Mora County. In January, a group of us got together when we heard that there were landmen in the Mora County area, and we were concerned. We began meeting, and our purpose became multifaceted. One of them was that we felt it was very important, since the issue to us was very new, that we lead an educational drive, so to speak, on oil and gas because of the complexity of the issue. And the other aspect of it was our concern about what would happen if oil and gas did come into our county. So one of our main concerns is our desire to protect and preserve our water, which is the county's most fragile and important resource. Of course, it feeds the land and it feeds our families and it keeps our agriculture growing. It keeps a way of life that's been going on in Mora County for generations intact. And we feel very passionately about keeping Mora County agricultural and supporting the Development Guidance System, which is the DGS, which does not support any polluting industries.
How viable is oil and gas exploration here in Mora County?
On past drilling, apparently there were about 51 gas wells that were drilled here in the mid to late 70s, and none of those wells are active at this time. But every one of them was very shallow. They were 400 to 800 feet deep, and there was either low pressure or no pressure on those wells, so they weren't very viable at the time. That's why they were closed in. Some of those wells were actually given to the property owners, and they modified them to become water wells because of the depth of them. So right now, you know, it really depends on who's willing to come in and take a look at this, and whether any exploration is going to actually happen in Mora County. Yes, ma'am.
How many inspectors are there?
We have, for the entire state, probably about 18 inspectors.
And how many wells are there in the state?
Right about 60,000. So yes, we're very short-handed.
A picture of a gas well and just all the stratas and the safeguards.
But it would be like drilling a water well. Once the operator knows that they've made it through the water table right there, they go ahead and cement that area. They case it off so that nothing else is going to get through that area. Once they've cased off the fresh water, then they'll go ahead and drill or start setting casing into the hole. And once again, they're going to cement that one off, and then they'll have another string that goes in after that. So it does actually have a couple areas of protection there on the fresh water. Now, where the problems come in are where wells are abandoned after a long period of time, and either the cement or the pipe actually starts to deteriorate within the hole. And then there are some issues there that might come to play if there's leaks from either oil or gas.
Do you monitor water use in production of drilled wells?
No, we're not.
You don't? Not like Texas, the Railroad Commission?
No, sir.
Okay, you're saying you're drilling for gas, not oil? Is that natural gas?
So far, all the wells that we have a history on in Mora County have been gas wells. Yes.
Natural gas?
Natural gas, yes.
Since you mentioned you have so few inspectors, how do you know in fact that the water layers there's been casing has actually been done?
The majority of them, we have the ability either to have the BLM help us, because they have enough people when they're out there on drilling rigs. We don't have those, but they're verifying on, at least on BLM land, that those casing programs are adequate. We do spot checks, and that's really the only way we have of doing it.
Over the last 20 years, we've learned a lot, and we have a lot to share. with communities who are just facing oil and gas development. So me and my staff and colleagues spend a lot of time traveling around to different communities and talking with folks about how they can get ahead of the development and what they can do to try to get proper protections in place. And for those who are interested, I brought a limited number of copies, but we have a model mineral lease agreement. And I know a lot of folks are getting the knock on the door from companies urging them, the landowners, to lease your mineral rights. And we always say, look before you lease. Don't sign anything an oil and gas company gives you. Take your time with it and really take some time to learn the issues first and consider your options. Talk with your neighbors. Maybe consult an attorney if you have those kind of resources. But definitely consider the other options that are out there because, as one attorney I work with in Colorado says, signing a lease that the company gives you is like signing a blank check. All of those are well paths, and they're going to at least, this is a couple years old now, this line. There's a lot more wells out there now, but this is New Mexico. You know, if you fly over our areas for as far as the eye can see, it's just a spider web of wells, well pads, roads, compressor stations, pipeline corridors. Our landscape has become very industrialized. You'll see drilling rigs in people's fields, pipeline corridors through folks' yards and across the landscape, and pump jacks next to people's homes. I get this question everywhere I go. People are saying, that's not a gas well, that's an oil well, that's pumping oil. And I'm like, well, actually with coal bed methane, they're actually pumping the water off of the coal seam in order to produce the gas. So, you know, some of our wells, these pump jacks stay on for a couple years or more, and some of them are still pumping water that have been around for a number of years. Back in 2002, right after companies received approval in my county to double the number of wells, our county commissioned a study and found out that property values decline about 22% with a well on the land. And then the folks we work with, and a lot of the complaints we get are about heavy truck traffic, creating dust and noise. Noise is actually our #1 complaint that we get in our office from folks literally around the country. We're especially concerned with the fluids that they use to frack, the toxic chemicals, the diesel fuel, and trying to get companies to use green or non-toxic drilling fluids. I know I first got involved in the oil and gas issue in '98 when someone called and said they could light their tap water on fire after a well had been drilled near their house. We encourage everyone to do that might be facing oil and gas development is to get a baseline water test and to be able to understand what's currently in your water in case in the future your water quality degrades, then you'll be able to show that wasn't, you know, certain contaminants weren't in your water to begin with. Because the burden of proof is usually on the landowner to prove harm. And it's often pretty hard to take a big oil and gas company to court.
We've actually been working with the local group here, drilling Mora County. There is no, you probably know this, there's not a zoning ordinance here, but that doesn't mean there's no land use regulation in Mora County. There is actually a pretty good land use regulation. It's called the Development Guidance System. There are 3 types of uses in the county. Uses by right, which are kind of ranching and traditional agricultural uses, grazing, dwelling, and so forth. Oil and gas isn't among those uses of right. And then there are prohibited uses, and prohibited uses are uses that would create a nuisance, like creating odor, noise, polluting, and so forth. So an oil and gas well couldn't go in if it would create a nuisance, if it would constitute a prohibited use. Any use that would create a nuisance would be a prohibited use.